But as you veer into these COVID-19 induced lockdowns, they might have fallen into the vulnerability bracket. And that's why we are saying, please expand the scope of whom you actually consider as vulnerable in the... I have Mr. Joseph Kabuleta. Mr. Joseph Kabuleta is a former presidential candidate with whom we are going to be expounding more on this conversation. A very good morning, Mr. Joseph Kabuleta.
Very good morning to you, Romeo,
Indeed.
and to the viewers.
Indeed. Now, Joseph Kabuleta and I are going to be expounding more on government's interventions during this COVID-19 induced lockdown. We do know that on Saturday, a 35-year-old mobile market vendor passed on. His name was Mr. Katongole. He was going to Mitiana Gombolola grounds to actually receive some food, courtesy of the Mitiana Municipality MP, that is Francis Zake. Now, half a kilometer away to the food distribution point, he collapsed and died. Now, so many of our Ugandans find themselves in that state of debacle that this young man found himself in. When he couldn't find any food, he was starving in his home without any help finding him. But when we heard of someone distributing food, he actually left his home and decided to work there. But he did not make it. He died on the way. So how many of our Ugandans are grappling within their homes and are starving in that regard? How many of those whom we thought in the villages are actually tilling their gardens and are not, and are actually starving right now? So that's a conversation we are largely having right now. A very good morning, Mr. Joseph Kabuleta.
Good morning.
A very, very long preamble into this conversation, but help us understand how we got to this situation. COVID-19 induced lockdowns. By the way, do they work?
No, they don't. They don't, and what I'm saying is not my opinion.
Indeed.
It is an opinion of a scientific study that was carried out by Stanford University and was absolutely peer-reviewed and carried across the media world. And it said, and they did the study by reviewing countries that instituted the most draconian lockdowns, as well as comparing them to those that didn't, like Sweden, like Tanzania, like Croatia, like South Dakota in the US, which had absolutely no COVID restriction. And now when they look at the number of infections and deaths per capita, they actually came out to the conclusion that the lockdowns did not help whatsoever. And then they actually looked at all the other impacts of lockdown, you know, depression, suicides, and all the other deaths. In our case, of course, depression comes out in a different way. We're reading here a story of a man who went and chopped, you know, his brother and went and declared himself.
Over a pair of oxen.
Exactly. And so depression comes up in all sorts of ways. Domestic violence, you know, deaths that could be avoided, people getting angry because they are being denied their normal lifestyle and they cannot go and earn, and all the frustration.
You're doing well, I'm not doing well, so I attack you in the middle of the night. Such stories.
Stories like that. For us, it might not so much lead to suicides, but, you know, all sorts of depression. Now, there are so many things that come as a result of lockdown. And I've never believed that we should lock down an entire society of a sickness that is not even in the top 10 killers in Uganda. Now, that is a statistical fact. It is not my opinion. And the thing is that we are losing so many other people as a result of trying to prevent COVID deaths. And the unfortunate thing for people who support this kind of measures is that they have settled it in their mind that there are deaths that matter and those that don't. So if there are children dying of malnutrition and because they can't get to hospitals and get care for, you know, and learn how to, you know, resuscitate their children and so on, it doesn't matter because they are poor people from slums and villages and so on. It doesn't matter. But COVID kills the people who matter, that sort of thing. Now, that is the origin of, you know, a decimation of society. When you start thinking that there are deaths that matter and those that don't. Now, I don't ever want to ever think like, bring myself to ever think in such a way, because that disqualifies somebody to be a leader. The minute you start thinking that your death matters more than somebody else's, or that you are more, and even this terminology that we've adopted in this thing, that essential worker. I mean, who is a non-essential worker? Now, try telling that man who died on his way to getting food.
Katongole, Thomas.
Katongole, or try telling the man who is looking at his children who are starving and he has no food to feed them.
8 children, 3 wives.
8 children, 3 wives. And they are looking at him. He has hands, he has, you know, feet. He can go and earn a living, but he's been locked down. Now try telling his children that he is not an essential worker. To them, he's more essential than the president and all the cabinet combined, because those ones are not going to feed him. This man is going to feed him. So every worker is essential.
Indeed.
Now, when we take on this whole thing of some people are non-essential and yet they have families to feed, and they have dependents and so on. And then we pretend that we have the necessary, structure to put out some sort of, social,
Social protection tools.
yeah, I mean, for the vulnerable people, we do not have that structure. We've said so many things that were never done. I mean, there was money that was released for buying radios. Nobody received the radio. For televisions, you remember that?
Indeed.
Nobody received the television. So people were asking me, shall we get the money? I said, well, good luck. But if you got the radios and the TVs, but some people, I know people who have gotten the money, and that's good, but that's just a drop in the ocean. There is so, as your statistics saying, the 7 million, who are vulnerable, but there is so many more people who live hand to mouth, and we cannot afford in this society. You see, there was even a time traders would try to demonstrate, against something. In 3 days, they are hungry, and they forget about the demonstration, and they go back to work.
Yes.
3 days, now you're locking people up for 42 days without any form of help. And now I even saw, when I was sitting waiting to come on the show, that they're even planning to stop the distribution of food by, individuals, members of parliament, and so on, because apparently they have an issue with it. Wasn't that part of the headlines here this morning? Now, how callous can you be as a government, really? Because these are people who are not supposed to be distributing food. They are legislators. They're supposed to be in parliament making laws. But they have gone out of their way to help people because there is a need, there is an outcry. Now, even that, you have a problem with it.
What is government more afraid of? That these politicians might get more political clout with their food distribution programs during this very strenuous time of COVID-19, and that's why they are stopping them?
Yes, because they make government look bad.
I see.
Because they make government look bad. Because and you see now in the state that we are in, the kind of government that we have,
Yes,
anybody that comes out and actually cares about people and demonstrates their care for people is making government look bad. And I was looking, and I was actually waiting for this to happen.
Indeed.
Because it was widespread. People were, looking away from government and now looking away from Nabanja's, much debated 100,000.
Indeed.
And they were looking at their members of parliament who came through, and very nice things. But now government stands and says, no, these people are making us look bad. And it is not about helping the people. It never was with this government. So the whole thing is this: the only solution to the whole fiasco is just end the lockdown. It is not helping whatsoever.
But Mr. Joseph Kabuleta, we've seen a reduction of COVID-19 cases as a result of this COVID-19 lockdown. Before we had instituted the same lockdown, we were recording cases within their thousands on a daily basis. Hundreds of people were dying on a weekly basis, and then that has reduced during this COVID-19 induced lockdown. Don't you think it has done some good?
Here's the thing. First of all, that's not true, what you're saying in terms of the numbers. But then also, secondly, how can you say that that is because of lockdowns? Because all COVID outbreaks, they come. I mean, all epidemics come, they peak, they plateau, then they go down. So you cannot necessarily say that it is because of this mitigating measure that we put in place. That's how all, it has been happening in other places.
Yes.
Because even when there was no lockdown here prior, I mean, the numbers would go up and would go down. And so when there is a new wave, we expect them to go up, we expect them to go down. That's just the way it is.
All right.
So we cannot tie it down to the lockdown, especially since, as I told you, some scientific people say that actually the lockdowns did not help. And then also, that there's not really been, the real institution of the lockdown, the way it was the first time.
Yes.
Now there's been a lot of interaction among people and so on. It's just that people are not working, just that public transport is not working, and we are in a society where we cannot afford to have public transport not working. Because as a result, so many women are not going to get to hospitals to deliver their babies. So many people are going to die of preventable sicknesses because they cannot come to starvation because they cannot go and work. All those people who are locked have families, and the government does not have the capacity to help those people. It doesn't even have the interest, as far as I know. So why don't just let them just end the lockdown? It was a mistake in the first place, and actually it is up to us to make sure that the word lockdown is never mentioned again in our vocabulary after this, because it has been a total trauma. It's a traumatic experience for so many people, and I've interacted with people and the suffering of people, and we cannot let this happen again. We cannot let the president think that he can sit in his comfort like Mother B and start instituting his directions when it does not affect him. So the whole point is, end the lockdown. Let people go and work. Teach people how to avoid the sickness. Teach people how to identify the symptoms, go for treatment. everywhere across the world, people have come to the conclusion that we have to live with COVID.
But instead of a sensitization campaign, we've seen a different approach coming in from government, the heavy-handedness or the high-handedness of the security forces. Do you think high-handedness can achieve behavioral change, as government is actually purporting right now? Can we beat people into submission?
Well, you can beat them into fear, but you have to explain to them how it is they can avoid, getting sick. And if they get sick, because I believe ultimately, I mean, so many people will get sick, how to handle the sickness. Thankfully, the sickness does not have a very high mortality rate, okay? It's across the world, the number of people, percentage of people who recover are 99.72.
Yes.
The deaths are only 0.28, and that's worldwide.
Yes.
Okay, Uganda, the figures are a lot more encouraging. So thankfully, that is the case. So we can encourage people on how to go about it. Then secondly, the school children are at very little risk. Okay, even in other countries, they are not being targeted for vaccination because of the very little risk. Even when they get COVID and they test for it, it's mostly asymptomatic, and there's not been any significant death in that area. So let the children go to school, because it is affecting them so much, and it's going to affect them. I mean, we have depressed children and so on, and just let them go to school. And then afterwards, we can, walk around, going around with this pandemic. Let me tell you something.
Go ahead.
In the UK, they decided yesterday, Monday, July 19th, as the day that they remove all COVID restrictions. And they said, and I listened to their, health secretary, and he said that we have, it doesn't mean, there is no date we shall set which comes with no risk. Whatever date we set comes with risk. There will be people who get COVID, and unfortunately, the people die. But we need to get our businesses rolling. And our business community needs to know that now we have started, we are not going to stop again. Because we can't be in start, stop. Now the COVID numbers are, now we're locked down. Now then nothing happens in terms of business. Now, to know how much this tyranny has affected
yes.
let me finish. I was seeing pictures, because it started on midnight, on Sunday night.
Yes. You saw the people in bars in the UK.
Lining up, because nightclubs could not open until midnight. So by 8 p.m., people were lining up outside nightclubs just waiting for midnight.
I was like, what has happened within the UK? And that could have been the big problem, in that when you loosen restrictions, the people believe maybe the threat is gone, and they just come up in droves.
Let me tell you something.
These are people who have not even been vaccinated, even though the UK has inoculated 68% of the adult population. But they were just not wearing face masks. They were in there, and we could see an explosion of cases, because even now, the UK is registering 50,000 cases on a daily basis. Yeah. And they say in the summer, that number could go up to 200,000 if they keep up this trend that we are seeing right now.
Yes, but then also there's the bit about how many of those are leading to deaths.
Indeed.
Because there have been talk of Delta variant, Lambda, and so on. But when you look at the number of people who have tested positive for those variants, and the number of deaths, it is still very insignificant. So you cannot stop whole society because of that. Now, even people going and lining up to enter nightclubs and so on, it's because they have been tied up so much, and life has to continue. We are not going to stop living our lives.
Do you also envisage a situation where that also befalls onto this nation, Uganda, whereby we loosen restrictions, we say, okay, the 42-day lockdown is done, and then people just bombard the streets just like that, without any regard of COVID-19, face mask wearing and so forth, largely because of the heavy-handedness with which we used to execute the lockdown? It's inevitable.
It's inevitable. Every time you lock there's some pent-up desire to have fun, pent-up desire to go and people to express themselves. So you cannot stop it. But here's the thing. We have to learn how to let people take responsibility for their own life. That's what happened with previous pandemics. I remember I lived through a cholera pandemic, and at the time I used to stay in a slum, and there was very high chances of cholera. But we knew, they told people, do not eat cold food, do not do this, do not do that. And somehow, and it killed thousands, bigger numbers than COVID, actually. Cholera, just something as simple as cholera, and it killed thousands. And there was a tent at Old Mulago where cholera cases were being gathered, and I was seeing people dying. So, but somehow you leave it up to the people to be responsible. You tell them, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and make sure you improve your hygiene and so on. Then we lived through the AIDS pandemic. And we did not close lodges. We did not close, even if that's the place where so many people, got the virus. We did not close anything. But we left it up to people to be responsible and tell them this is a killer, this can cause this. And we were seeing the death toll from AIDS. A lot of us who lived through that time were seeing it actually. So we had to take the responsibility by ourselves to be, and we lived through that period because they told us the risk, they told us the way to prevent it. You remember the famous ABC campaign, abstain, be faithful, or use protection. And there were all these things telling people about what, go and test, make sure you protect your loved ones, and so on and so forth. And that was a bigger pandemic than COVID will ever be, only it will not get the same publicity. But so we have to transfer the same methodology. And by the way, because of the responsibility and because of some people, I remember coming out and cautioning people, stars, and even some stars who caught it. The numbers were reduced, and somehow it's not as prevalent now as it was then. Yet we do not take any drastic or draconian measures. So the point is this: we have to live. We will all die, one way or the other, COVID or no COVID. Okay, the fact that we are alive means we will die. Now we have to live while we are in the process of living, because we are not yet dead.
But then I had to be the bearer of bad news, Mr. Joseph Kabuleta, because the lockdown is still here. Why? We look at the factors that might actually force government or compel them to call for another lockdown. First of all, they called for this COVID-19 induced lockdown to be able to carry out vaccinations. That largely has not taken root. They wanted to vaccinate the teachers, the learners, so that we can reopen our schools when the learners are in a safe environment. Now that that hasn't happened, it means, yes, this lockdown is going to be extended.
Is it that it hasn't happened?
Aren't you afraid that this might happen? There could be an extension.
I would really, now any extension, because there's already been a death sentence on hundreds of Ugandans every day because of the lockdown, not because of COVID. Okay, the death toll from a week of lockdowns beats the entire death toll of 1.5 years of COVID. That's a reality. So how long are we going to stop pretending that COVID is the only cause of death? How long are we going to stop pretending that there are certain people who are so important, their death matters more than others? How long are we going to know that? To take statistics, I was seeing even recently in the Data Monitor that 10 people shot dead every day in the process of implementing COVID restrictions. 10 people every day. Now put that, multiply that by the 1.5 years that we've been in this COVID era, okay, close to 1.5 years, and guess what? More people shot dead than COVID. And those are short dead. I'm not talking about those who die of starvation, those who die of hunger-related sicknesses, those who die of malnutrition, mostly babies, those who die of malaria because they can't get access to hospitals, the mothers who die giving birth because they can't get access to hospitals because of the lack of, the absence of public transport, and so on and so forth. Now combine those deaths and you see that lockdown is the most stupid decision that was ever made by the leadership of this country, and they've actually made so many stupid decisions, But this one is at the tip of it all, because we have to look at death and causes of death holistically. We cannot pretend like COVID is the only cause of death. That's where I have a problem, because our society is so fragile. Every interruption in our society causes people to die. People die even in normal times. The figures of people who die of malaria, childbirth, malnutrition are high even in normal times. Now they are exponentially high in times of lockdown because of the absence, especially, of public transport. Now, I'll tell you that you go to Mulago, there's that place called the acute ward, where they take malnourished children. Malnutrition is the #1 cause of death in Uganda, okay? #1 cause of death. They take usually they're about hundreds. You'll find hundreds. Okay, hundreds is an exaggeration, between 100 and 200. Mothers taking their children there. Some of them because of malnutrition, and you know how it's caused. Maybe the mother cannot breastfeed, and of course there's no food, so they start giving them this normal food that we take, which is not, absorbed into the baby system because they are not yet developed enough. Their digestive system is not yet developed enough to absorb that. So the child starts losing weight. The mother is concerned. We are giving him food, he's losing weight, but the food they are giving is not the food that his body needs. So the next thing you know, the child, actually some of them are in medical shock, already beginning to get cold in the feet when they come there. But because of that place there, they are rescued. They are given, some of them are given therapeutic milk, which revives them. And most of them in 2 weeks, because, children, they go down fast, but also they get up fast. Indeed. Because in 2 weeks, most of them are back to normal life, and their lives are saved. And the mothers are taught what kind of food to feed their children, and and those children survive. Now also, the Uganda Health Demographic Survey, down where you said, shows that 3 out of every 10 Ugandans, that could include you and me, are stunted. Okay, that means they never acquire their stature, the fullness of their stature. They're stunted, and the stuntedness can be extreme, you know, or it can be minor.
Indeed.
So, which means it's possible that I'm stunted. Maybe I would be your height if I'd fed well in the first 5 years of my life, and maybe you would be taller than what you are right now if you had fed well. So, 3 out of 10 Ugandans. That's a damning statistic. 3 out of 10. But and all these hundreds of children. Now, guess what? That ward where those hundreds of children go is now a ghost town. Why is that? Because no public transport. Even if the nurses were considered essential workers, they don't have cars to get there. So the nurses are not there. And of course, the mothers are not essential workers. I hate to use that language because it is demeaning. Calling somebody who has a family non-essential, that's demeaning terminology. But anyway, the mothers don't bring the children. So guess what? Those hundreds of children who are saved every day, guess what they are doing? They are at home dying quietly. Indeed. Outside of the media blaze, outside of all the publicity that has been reserved for COVID. Okay? And yet there are hundreds of people. And the lockdown is a death
People sentence. Like Thomas Katongole.
People like Thomas Katongole. And now there are children, so many children, who are more vulnerable. Okay? The adults are vulnerable too. But now Thomas Katongole has children. Now what's going to happen to his children now that the breadwinner has died of hunger? Now imagine what is the children, because we are a lot more, you know, resilient in scenarios than children. So my question is, are we going to continue passing death sentences to young, poor, and, you know, apparently non-essential people, and we sentence them to death because there is something called COVID, which apparently...
All right, you mentioned
which kills
you mentioned poor, and then you put these children in a bracket that is not being considered as vulnerable by the government. And of course, according to you, both 8.3 million people are poor, but according to government, these people do not need government intervention. They say that these people should go for the poverty alleviation programs like AMIOGA with the Microfinance Support Center, like the Youth Livelihood Fund, the Uganda Women Entrepreneurship Program with the Gender Ministry docket. Don't you think these individuals, the 7.79 million people, should also be included within this vulnerability bracket and should be targeted with COVID-19 relief?
I think they should be let to go and work. That relief cannot cover 7.9 million people. We know it. Even the people targeted, I don't believe that they will get the money. Even if those people should go to all those programs that you mentioned, in the absence of public transport, the society is crippled, because how are they going to move? Okay, society is absolutely crippled. When you put a curfew, all restaurants reduce their workers by almost 75%, because a lot of the food is sold, you know, after 7. That's when most of the diners go there. And so people cannot sell in that time. How many people? In the time when people are working is when the restaurants are open, and people are not going to restaurants. When they are supposed to go to restaurants, they are closed. So, so many people have lost their jobs. 1.8 million people fell back into, you know, below the poverty line after the first lockdown. So we had made some strides of people who had gotten out of the, you know, under the poverty line.
Now they are falling back.
1.8 million. In the first lockdown, 1.8 million fell back. Now after the second lockdown, wait for the statistics. They are going to be terrible. And these are things we might take 10 years to recover from. These 42 days, we might take 10 years to recover from. And it is so sad. I would want to look into the face of anybody at the Ministry of Health who went and told the president that we should do a lockdown. I would want to look in their face and have a decent argument with them and tell them what is the source of their logic. Or tell the Minister of Health, maybe they turn her title to Minister of COVID, because there are so many other health concerns that have been totally neglected because of COVID. Of course, we know there is money in COVID, and you know there's profiteering and so on, but still, do not push people under the bus because you want to profiteer from the virus. It's going to be here, by the way. There are still people who are profiteering from HIV, okay? And there are still people who are dying from it. So we can live with it, while the people who, you know, have gotten their jobs from COVID continue doing their jobs, but people are not dying of hunger, so that we stop having stories like Katongoles and so many others. Others that I know, by the way, who might not necessarily have died of hunger, but of, you know, there are so many sicknesses which if you have, you can't survive a lockdown. I'll give you an example. Look at people who have, you know, type 1 diabetes, and they are poor, and then you tell them lockdown. You know how fragile
Indeed.
those people is. Sugar is high, sugar
Yes,
is low,
yes,
sugar.
yes.
That's a death sentence. And somebody dies and he could have been alive. If you could go and work, he has, money, he can eat when he has to eat. You know, the regulated eating of those people, eat
Yes.
now, do what, check your sugar, check what, is it high, move what, inject yourself. Now,
Insulin and so forth.
insulin, now, that is a, lockdown is a death sentence to those people. And so many other people. So why are we doing it? Is it only COVID that is killing people? It's killing even small numbers in comparison. And I'm not saying that anybody should die. They shouldn't. Okay, we want all people alive. But in the weighing scale, we should look, are we trying to prevent COVID deaths and causing so many other thousands of deaths, which is the case? Is it even sustainable? So I don't even believe the president should wait the 42 days. I think he should end the lockdown before. Everywhere in the world, people are opening up. Everywhere in the world, people are coming to the conclusion that we have to live with COVID.
But reality check, that won't be happening, Joseph Kabuleta, in the absence of the vaccinations. That is the only key to reopening our
The
economy.
vaccinations, it is not the people's fault that they are not.
It is the government.
It's the government.
And the nationalism we are seeing on in the international scene. Countries clamoring and buying all the vaccines and storing them, by the way, for future use.
I don't know.
At the expense of Africa.
No, at the expense of Africa, but it is not the fault of people. So you can't lock people up as you yourself go through all your bureaucracy and red tape to get vaccines here. Open them up. When the vaccines come, people will come and get vaccinated.
All right, let's go to Koboko. We shall return and compound more on this conversation. In Koboko, we are now joined by Rashul Adidi. He's going to be updating us on what is happening there as far as the Eid al-Adha celebrations are concerned. Well, in West African countries, it is known as the Tabaski Festival, and it involves a lot of travel, something that we are calling against within these countries as a result of the COVID-19 disease. Mr. Rashul Adidi, a very good morning, and thank you for joining us on Morning at NTV. What's the latest?
Yes, a very good morning, Kiro. Me in the studio. I have to say, happy Eid celebration. Of course, the Muslims, they are celebrating Eid al-Adha. Here in Koboko, people are celebrating, people are having their prayers from the different homes. We are aware that this time we're celebrating the day under lockdown, and congregational prayers are not allowed. Romeo, next to me, I have the district card of Koboko District Muslim Body, who is going to give us more information on how the Muslims are celebrating the day in Koboko district. Yeah, you can talk. Yeah,
okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good morning to you. A happy Eid day. I'm the district card of Koboko. My name is Abu Bakar Wailose. We are celebrating the Eid for the prayers. We are praying it individually in our various homes, with our families, and we keep to the norms and the regulations so that we observe the SOPs to avoid the threat of COVID-19 pandemic. I just want to say happy Eid Day to everybody in Koboko and in Uganda or elsewhere. I want to say this is a happy day in which we are trying to follow the celebrations and the performance of our Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, who really trusted his God. He wanted to give a sacrifice by giving his own son, by which the God, the Almighty Allah, who is lovely, replaced the God, replaced his son with a ram. And there we are following. Whoever has afforded and is able to perform those sacrifices, you can slaughter a ram, you can slaughter a goat or a cow, and make sure you divide that meat into three: one for your family consumption, next the second one for your neighbors, and then the third one for your friends, and any day for today.
Maybe, Mr. District Card, make us understand what is the population of the Muslim body in Koboko district.
The population of Muslim body in Koboko, we are around 23,000 Muslims. And we have 135 mosques, which mosques give us 9 Muslim counties: Matwales, and which forms the district of Koboko Muslim district.
Maybe lastly, what will be your message to the people about how they're supposed to celebrate this day?
Yes, my message to the people is that let us make this day a happy day to us, but let us be very observant from the current situation we are in. Let's observe the SOPs because of the corona. Let us not mix, let us not join anyhow. And we have been affected in these celebrations by having it in a unique way. Otherwise, we used to share, we used to gather in mosques, and then after the mosques, we used to go for visits to friends and relatives. But this one, because of the COVID, it has been affected. We are not going to allow these visitations. Even at home, let us be well arranged for if we meet others or people who join us or in the neighborhood, let us not mix anyhow. Food services must be well arranged so that we don't promote the disease to all of us. I want to wish everybody a happy Eid Day and happy celebrations. Please remember your families are the key areas to which you should concentrate. This is the Eid for the family. Happy Eid Day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, the management of NTV, for coming to us for this celebration. I want to wish you also happy Eid celebration. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Rashul Adidi coming to us live from Koboko. He was talking to the district Cadi of Koboko. Happy Eid to all the Muslims within that jurisdiction and all over the world. Happy Eid al-Adha to you and your loved ones. But please be cognizant of the fact that the COVID-19 disease is here. And in this particular jurisdiction of ours, Uganda, 90,656 cases of COVID-19 have been registered. Out of that, 2,392 people have succumbed, meaning they have been killed by the COVID-19 disease. Luckily, 68,000 people plus have actually with us on the #1 breakfast show in the country, Morning at NTV. Yes, Morning at NTV has noticed an uptick in the number of cases owing to COVID-19 that have been registered on the international scene. 190.5 million plus cases of COVID-19 have been registered. You can't believe the US is grappling the most with over 34.1 million plus cases of COVID-19. India, 31.1 million. And then you have Brazil, the third most battered country with 19.3 million plus cases of COVID-19. Fast forward to the Pearl of Africa, 90,656 cases of COVID-19 have been registered, and sadly, 2,392 people have succumbed. On the whole global stage, over 4,090,000 people have actually succumbed or been killed as a result of the novel COVID-19 disease. So we have a lockdown that is in its 5th week, and many people are saying the people whom we are targeting with this money, the COVID-19 relief, should be widened to see that we cover more people. We are targeting the single mothers, people living in the urban ghettos or slums. But what about those individuals within the rural settings that are not going to the farms anymore? Aren't they dying too? And why are we not targeting them with this COVID-19 relief? I still have Joseph Kabuleta, a former presidential candidate, with whom we are expanding more on this very pertinent conversation. Good morning once again, Joseph.
Good morning.
Thank you for staying with me right here in Morning at NTV.
My pleasure.
People we are targeting involve single mothers, people in the urban ghettos and slums and so forth. Don't you think we should also be targeting the people within the rural areas? Someone who was tilling at a garden, but because of drought that hit, they are grappling with crop failure, meaning they do not have food to eat in this regard, and they could be starving.
So it's, and for people in the rural places, because I've seen a bit of that, it's been a bit of a double whammy, because not all, they need a bit of money as well. So they're not going to get everything from the gardens. But even then, you've seen stories of bunches of matoke going for 500 shillings.
3K in Badara.
3K.
3,000.
500 shillings in some places. There was a story actually, I think it was even on your network,
yes,
where I was seeing, and somebody handed over 2 huge bunches of matoke in Fort Portal, and for 1,000, he said I needed the money, and this is the only thing I have to liquidate. the matoke. He knows, of course, that's a very depressed price, but that's the situation there. So lockdown affects so many things. You can't even start to tell how big a problem it is across our societies, even for people in rural areas who do not necessarily have to go and work that day maybe in the Chikubo, Nasarod, or so on, to feed. But even they are affected in so many ways, because remember, they have to transport that food here. That's how they get money. It gets value when it comes to urban centers and so on. Now, in the absence of that, if the food is in the rural places and everybody has it, then it goes down in value, because you're selling batches of matoke to people who have matoke as well, and you're surrounded by people who have matoke. The only thing that gives your matoke value is when it is transported and taken to urban places where people are not growing matoke.
And that's why we called in government to step in and offer transportation for this food. Go to areas where there's abundance in this food, a bunch of matoke going for 500, buy it as government, and then distribute it in areas where food is actually being expensive during this lockdown.
You people are talking like government is God. I mean, this government is so dysfunctional. It cannot do even the simplest things. It cannot do even the simplest of simple things. And you're speaking as if, you know, they have the ability to do this. Government should do this. Government should just release people to go and work, okay, and wait for taxes and use those taxes the way they see fit, because they don't have the capacity.
Because even the taxes are not there, because you didn't help SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, during the lockdown and before. So even when they come back, they do not have capital to help them resuscitate their businesses. So no taxes from that sector.
Absolutely. And now, and then of course there's the rental tax, which was brought
30%.
here. And now the landlords are trying to pass it on to the tenants, which tenants are not even doing business.
They are just sleeping and starving.
Yes, and they can't even be allowed to come into town. So there are actually so many boiling things which are going to come out at some stage in the future. And I would want to look in the face of anybody, as I said, who supports this lockdown. Because do they even have a clue about how long it's going to take us to come out of this thing? And do they think that at some stage we are going to wake up and there is no COVID? The answer is no. Do they think they are going to wake up at some stage and there are no new positive tests for COVID, or a few more deaths of COVID and so on? The answer is no. So how do we minimize those deaths while not pretending that they are the only deaths that matter, and while we look at the holistic health situation in the country and how lockdown is so negatively affecting it? That's the challenge for everybody involved. And the rural people suffer, even if they may not suffer from food and hunger, generally speaking. Of course, there are those who do. But generally speaking, they do not go and buy food every day. They know they get food from some, place nearby. But they are the ones who suffer the most as a result of non-access to hospitals. They're the ones who suffer as a result of, they can't move, they can't go and give birth and so on. So so many people are dying there as a result of the lockdown, not because of hunger like those in Kampala, but because of the absence of public transport. That is a very, very key thing. Absence of public transport, very key thing. Because I've said it before, even before the lockdown was instituted. I said borders are ambulances, borders are... And actually, as it would be, I said it, and then the next day, we are seeing a whole minister and a general jumping on a border in time of need to go to hospital. Because they are the easiest way of transporting somebody. And you take that away, then you've taken away so many people's ability to get to where they are supposed to be when they are sick, to go and get help. Borders are transporting mothers with children. Borders are transporting mothers to go and give birth, pregnant women, and so on. But you have a bit of trigger-hungry men in green.
Joseph Kabuleta, your argument is really, really valid, but based on what we were seeing before this lockdown could even be called, we had an oxygen shortage within this country. You had so many people who had bombarded health facilities and were not getting any help, many of whom were being treated on Mulago Hospital's verandas. COVID-19 patients, because the hospital had been filled to the brink. So we do ask, don't you think this lockdown is a necessary evil when it comes to cutting down the number of COVID-19 cases that we saw before? You did see how bad the situation was.
The people were on the street, on the corridors of Mulago because there was a new wave, not because there was no lockdown. I've told you before that there was a scientific peer-reviewed study which said the lockdowns do not help whatsoever. Now, you can come up and say the numbers have gone down because of lockdown. They have not gone down because of lockdown. They have gone down because the wave has been here, and ultimately those waves hit a plateau and then they go down. Okay? Now, we just have to make sure that all the mitigating things that we put in place are not making, causing deaths in other places. So the whole thing is, there was a big problem, okay? There was a big problem of a new wave of COVID which came. The solution was never a lockdown. It never was. I believe the reduction of the numbers and the reduction of the deaths was going to happen anyway. Lockdown has not helped whatsoever. I do not believe that.
Mr. Kabuleta, in the first wave, we were actually recommending government to ramp up the rate at which they were giving out PPEs, that is personal protective equipment, to our health workers. Yes. We are still doing the same in the second lockdown. Do you think government has learned anything during this pandemic?
No, government hasn't. And the reason I might not be, maybe I'm a bit more optimistic than you as regard to the lifting of the lockdown, because I mean, the money was released. So maybe now that we have the money and some people will be comfortable, you know, sharing out $1 billion, maybe they can let the rest of us survive in this country that we call Uganda, that we call home. So maybe they will let us survive as they share out the money, because our being home does not, or our being out of home does not stop them from doing that. But here's the thing. The PPEs, that was a big problem for people, you know, in fighting COVID. And so many people caught it as a result of that. There was a problem of oxygen. And you remember there was a deal that was given out in the first time for oxygen. And there was supposed to be a whole, you know, Nambole and all these beds, apparently with the ability in case there was need to have oxygen and so on. And there was a lot of funds that was released for that. Nambole was closed out for outside business, but we did not see the sort of camp that they made it. So now the vaccinations, locking people up because they're waiting for vaccinations. I mean, what if the vaccinations take 3 months to come? The point is, if the vaccinations come, people will go and vaccinate. In the meantime, let them survive. You're not going to vaccinate dead people who have died of hunger, like Katongole. So let the people go and live, and let when the vaccinations come, they will encourage people to go and vaccinate, those who are interested in going to vaccinate. So the lockdown is absolutely useless.
Former presidential candidate Joseph Kabuleta, very, very, very knowledgeable man with whom we've been having this conversation, largely centering around government's interventions during this COVID-19 induced lockdown and pandemic as a whole. Thank you very much, sir, for having made the time. Really need such people like yourself coming to shine a light on what is happening within this country. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I also want to thank, are we ending?
No.
Eh?
And you also want to thank?
I also want to thank the media, because now they are actually bringing to light the plight of suffering people.
Indeed.
I've been reading the media, I've been reading the mainstream media, I've been watching television, and you people are bringing to light the suffering of people, because we don't want them to suffer and die quietly.
Thank you very much.
So that's a compliment to the media people.
Thank you very much. That's why we left the mansions and we decided to go to Uganda.